Sorting through the many perspectives takes work. The seemingly never-ending opinions can get noisy. But what if we choose to change our vantage point? Think bigger. Dig deeper. Change the dialogue. Discovering the truth above it all. It's time to elevate the conversation.
Hey, I'm Caleb. A couple years ago, an interesting study came out that looked at people who watched loads of TikTok during the pandemic. And let's be so real, most of us could have been a part of this study too. What else were we supposed to do with the world shut down than scroll endlessly on our phones? Still, what the study found is pretty wild. Through the study, it was discovered that after watching video after video of the same songs, same dances, and quotes, teenagers began repeating the sounds or movements they saw without even thinking about it. Without being aware of it or consciously choosing to do it. They just broke out into dance or song or quote just because they'd watched it so many times. How many of you would say that you've experienced this at some point or another? And don't worry, my point isn't to get you to stop spending so much time on TikTok, though we all probably could do with a little break from the endless scrolling. Instead, I want to help you see the way the things you experience, whether online or day-to-day, impact your life. The videos you watch, the games you play, the music you listen to, the places you hang out, the school you attend, the accounts you follow on social media, it all has the potential to impact your words, thoughts, choices, and responses to other people. Sometimes what we consume has a way of impacting us more than we know. And that's why I want to spend some time together elevating the conversation of the topic of violence. Let me explain what I mean. Whether you realize it or not, our culture is consumed with violence. I'm sure even hearing that word brings some examples to mind. Maybe you think about the true crime podcasts and documentaries dominating our apps, the video games, the shows and movies that make violence a primary feature, the music that normalizes violent language and imagery toward others, or even the mass shootings at schools all over the country, the military conflicts and wars happening all over the world, the terrible acts of harm reported on the news. See what I mean? Whether it's apps, songs, Netflix, YouTube, or conversations, violence is everywhere. And if we're being honest, most of us would probably have to admit we don't even notice it. We take it in and we don't even flinch. That's because in our world, violence is almost too normal. Some would even say it's a central part of how our world works. Violence is unfortunately a part of the culture we live in today, and that means we have to figure out how to navigate it. Why? Because it's become so much a part of our lives, we often don't notice it for what it is. And that's where I think the tension lies. We watch a show with a ton of fighting, violence, and death, and eventually we stop having to turn away when the worst of it happens. We repeat songs with racially insensitive or sexually violent lyrics, or when you hear those same words repeated in the halls of your school, we don't even raise our heads. We play intense video games all weekend, and you find yourself being unexpectedly harsh or aggressive toward people you care about the next day. We hear so much about gun violence and school shootings in the news that it's almost something we anticipate will happen at some point. We listen to a true crime podcast during the day but can't sleep at night because of what you heard. Some of us may even be living in it at home, school, or in our neighborhood. And I don't know about you, but these things are unsettling to me. I don't want to see pain and heartbreak and death and hate. I don't want to change because of the violence I've seen. I don't want to start thinking that violence is a normal way of life, and I definitely don't want to be someone who never feels hopeful and always feels hopeless. Now, we're not necessarily going to solve the problem of violence today, but we are going to discover a first step toward more peace. So, what if there's another way to think about this? Let's raise the bar for conversations about violence. During Jesus' life and ministry, he made really clear statements about how he wanted his followers to think about and interact with violence in the world around them. A lot of these statements come from a message Jesus shared with his followers that's become known as the Sermon on the Mount. In this particular message, Jesus was speaking to his followers about how God calls us to live. He kicked it off by giving them a list of people he calls blessed. You and I probably have some thoughts about what it looks like to be blessed, right? Lots of money, all the things you want, your crush catching feelings for you, hey yo, a lot of clout or good reputation. And while their lists probably looked different than ours, the people listening back then likely had some expectation of who blessed looked like. That's what makes what Jesus said so unexpected. He didn't list off a bunch of things we might desire. Instead, he listed a bunch of things we can be. Let's take a look at just one. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. The Greek word used in this passage for blessed is makarios. It means a deep sense of happiness, fulfillment, or wholeness. So Jesus was saying that in order to be blessed with this lasting sense of fulfillment, we have to choose to be peacemakers, to be people who bring and create peace in any and all circumstances. For you and I today, this probably sounds like a stretch. How is it possible to be a peacemaker when your siblings won't stop bothering you, or your parents are fighting, or tragedy is happening in your community, or violence is all over social media? I'm guessing the people listening when Jesus said this back then probably felt the same way. Now, it's important to remember that Jesus said this to people who hadn't lived in peace for a very long time. Their land had been conquered and they were being ruled by the Roman Empire. The Romans had used violence as a way to threaten and control them. The people listening to Jesus teach this, they were hurt, they were suffering and probably angry. They were living in the middle of violence and were dealing with a lack of peace that wasn't their fault. So when Jesus told them they would be blessed if they were peacemakers, they probably thought, how can we possibly choose to be peacemakers when we're literally surrounded by violence? It's probably a question we could ask today too. How can we choose to be peacemakers when there's so much violence around us? Well, this is how what Jesus says becomes powerful and practical. Violence only leads to more violence. Repaying evil with evil becomes a vicious cycle. Jesus knew something his followers didn't. He knew that if they wanted to find deep fulfillment in the midst of the chaos around them, the answer was in choosing peace. The most powerful way to change things is through peace. Then, as Jesus said, we'll be called children of God. In other words, we'll be living as people who show the world what God, our Father, is like. Let's look at one more section of the Sermon on the Mount. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Jesus wasn't talking about our literal eyes here. Think of it more as focus. If you focus your attention, your time and thoughts on stuff that's good, the stuff Jesus calls light, then over time, that's what you'll find more of in your life. But if you focus on the things that aren't good, things Jesus labels as darkness, then eventually that will be what comes out in your life. If we let ourselves consume and focus on violence so often, eventually it's gonna change us. Let me show you what I mean. I'm gonna turn off the lights for just a second. At first, it probably seems really dark in here, but after a second or so, your eyes start to adjust. Now, the darkness doesn't seem so, dark. Sure, you can't see things the way you normally would, but you can see enough to get by. The longer we sit here, the more normal the darkness becomes. If I were to turn the lights on again, your eyes would struggle to see. Then the light would feel strange because the darkness became so normal. That's how the world is when you're surrounded by so much violence. It can become normalized and we can become numb to it. The more we consume and engage with violent content without giving it a second thought, the more normal what we see will become. But in a dark room, the person with a light has what it takes to start changing things for the better. They help everyone without a light see more clearly. And when we can see more clearly, we can move toward peace and help others walk toward peace as well. That is an example of what Jesus meant when he talked about peacemakers. The person with the light helps everyone else see more clearly. This is what being a peacemaker means. It's not avoiding the darkness or running from it or being consumed by it. It's being full of light. And here's what that means. Being a peacemaker starts with peace in your heart. Jesus knew that his people were sitting in darkness, He knew the way it was impacting them, even if they didn't realize it. He knew that what the world needed were people of light who could help others see things more clearly. So while they may not have been able to stop the war and persecution and imprisonment around them, they could move through a violent world with peace in their hearts. So if you and I want to be people who navigate violence in our culture in a healthy way, we have to start in our hearts. We have to pursue wholeness. We have to become consumers of the light of Jesus. We have to let it be the lens through which we see everything in the world around us. And we can do that by seeing violence for what it is. Get really honest with yourself about the content that you engage with regularly. The stuff you listen to, the games you play, the accounts you follow, the music on your playlist, the conversations you have at the lunch table, the clickbait articles you read. Don't shrug it off or try to look past it or assume it's no big deal. Instead, ask God to show you what you may not be seeing clearly in it. Let the light help you see the violence for what it is wherever it is. And then pay attention to the impact. Notice the way the violence you may be consuming or engaging with is impacting your thoughts, your words, your choices, and your reactions. Pay attention to the way your mood changes when you play that video game, or the impulses you have after listening to that song, or the way you treat other people after you've been online for hours. If you're not sure, be brave enough to ask someone close to you for help shining a light on the impact for you. If something is impacting you more than you realized, it might be your sign to take a step back from it for just a little while, to choose not to engage with it because it's not bringing you peace. Focus on peace. As you begin to notice the way violence might be impacting you, choose to shift your focus away from those things and onto the things that help you pursue peace. Paul, one of Jesus' closest followers, gave us an idea of where to start. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Then the God of peace will be with you. Y'all, this is our filter. When we're not sure if what we're focusing on is promoting peace, we can think back on Paul's words for guidance. Is this song I'm listening to honorable? Is the way this makes me feel good? Is my response to violence in the world pure and admirable? Am I being kind to others after binging that show? Are my words pure? Are my thoughts true? Being a peacemaker starts with peace in your heart. It starts with us. If we become people who pay attention to violence and see it for what it is, we'll be moving in the right direction. And if we let the light of Jesus help us choose peace over anything else, eventually, we're gonna see a change. Not just in ourselves, but in the world around us. We'll join in a long line of people who chose peace when the world around them didn't. People who chose to bring peace when the world around them chose violence that changed the course of history. That's what peace can do. I know this isn't easy, but I promise you, it can happen. It's gonna require you to get honest with yourself and to consider and maybe even change the way we think about things we watch, listen to, read, and play online. And a great first step for you today might be to talk honestly with your small group. Yo, they're there to support and encourage and challenge you to do big things God calls us to do, like choose peace. So when you head to small groups, think about this question. What does being a peacemaker mean to you?